Chapter 17. Course Correction. Today, I skipped all of my routine morning pleasantries and got to the office around 6:30 a.m. It was still dark outside. I wasn't in the mood for traffic, so I figured I'd just avoid it altogether. As I was making my way through the lobby, I noticed a few people crowded around one of the many watering holes. We had these mini coffee shops scattered all around the office. They had a barista and everything. The group seemed to be chatting about something or other, not to mention how incredibly early they reported in for work. I needed something to upset my rhythm, so I wandered on over and played the role of innocent bystander. It wouldn't be the first time I annoyingly interjected my way into a conversation. As I approached the group, they each began to eyeball me and size me up. The group was standing off to the side of the barista, but close enough for me to ask, "Are you guys in line?" No, go ahead," the group said. I stepped up to the barista and ordered. "What are you having today?" "I'll take a cappuccino, please." "How would you like it?" "Just the way I like my humor, hot and dry." There is nothing in this world more thirst-quenching than a nice and hot cappuccino. "Is 2% milk okay?" "Do you have 3% milk?" The barista gave me this confused stare for a second. I could tell she was trying to process my joke as a serious statement. 3%? I don't think we have any of that. Do you mean whole milk?" "That'll be fine." The thing about dry humor is that people either get it or they don't. "What'll be fine, the 2% or the whole milk?" "Oh, the 2% milk will be fine." In the meantime, I weaseled my way closer to the group. They were dressed too nice to be low-level employees. Maybe they were some of these foreign investors I kept hearing about. As I inched closer, I made sure to keep my back to the group, as I didn't want to arouse any suspicion. I was merely interested in some pre-workday eavesdropping. The guy basically got down on his hands and knees and started begging me for his job. What was I supposed to do, not fire him? One of the suits blurted out. The whole group started laughing out loud. That kind of bland corporate laughter that I was getting so very accustomed to. As I turned to see who was speaking, I made eye contact with one of the suits. That was a mistake. "Can I help you?" one of them asked in an oddly aggressive tone. "I don't know. Can you?" I said in a curious tone that matched his aggressive tone. The suit smiled and stuck out his hand. We shook hands and parted with the hostilities. "Mike Allen. And you are?" The suit stood up a little straighter and said, "Oh, you're Mike Allen? Nice to meet you, sir." "Don't call me sir. I work for a living." "I'm Henry with Hubris Consulting Partners." "Ah, HCP. What kind of consulting do you do exactly?" "Well, I handle talent procurement. Karen over there handles executive transition programs. Charles over here handles performance assessment and evaluation. Linda handles off-boarding, onboarding, and if you pay her enough, even waterboarding." The group started laughing again, so much that coffee slightly spilled out of their cups. That annoying splash that everyone hates, where it pours over just slightly enough to get onto the top of your lid. "Oh, so basically you guys are the dream team of layoffs." The group laughed out loud, again spilling drips of coffee. "Yeah, I guess you could say that." "I did just say that. Would you say that?" The barista interrupted and said, "Mike, your cappuccino is ready." Before the group could respond, I said, "Well, that's my cue to exit. Good luck with your layoffs. If you need any muscle, give me a call." I grabbed my cappuccino and Henry said, "Oh, don't worry. We'll be speaking again very soon." I waved them off and headed to the elevator. For some reason, I was in a feisty mood this morning. What an absolutely lovely way to start my day. As the elevator began to climb, I heard a faint jingle in my pants. Someone sent me a flurry of text messages. I looked down at my phone and it read, "Mike, my office in 10 minutes. David Berrigan." The light for my floor went off and the top floor button had lit up. Before I knew it, the elevator had stopped off at the top floor. The elevator doors opened to some classical jazz music. As I exited from the elevator, there was a large metal detector, multiple cameras, and 2 gigantic security guards. One of them motioned me through the metal detector and said, "This way, sir." The security guard led me through a tunnel which led to a bridge that was extended over a koi pond, an infinity-style pool, a private gym, a spa, and a small Italian restaurant. The decor of the office was very modern, sleek, elegant, and something I would expect to see in a magazine, or better yet, a movie. Clearly, David had done some minor renovations since our first interview. David Berrigan had everything in its exact correct place. No detail was overlooked, and everything was put together with clear intention. I was starting to get a good picture of who he was as a person. Someone who was hyper-observant, detail-oriented with a splash of neuroticism. You know the kind of person, a control freak. The kind of person who can't leave anything up to chance. A person who has to control the entire process from start to finish. The kind of person who has to have his fingerprints on everything, which means everything he touches better turn to gold. This was all something I would have expected from a mafia don, not an insurance executive. As the doors opened, the office brimmed up with light. His corner office was massive. From wall to wall, I'd say that there was like 100 feet of space. On the wall adjacent to his desk, there was a life-sized portrait of David. In the center of the room, there was a large oak desk that was embossed with some kind of fancy stain. David Berrigan had his back turned to me and was looking down at the street from one of his many large tinted windows. "Come on in, Mike. You've kept me waiting long enough." He turned to me and motioned me over to a side door with his hand. "Walk with me, Mike. Let's walk and talk. I mean, you can chew bubble gum and walk at the same time, right?" "Sure can. This is quite the setup you have here," I said as I galloped over to meet him. There are many ways to get ahead in the business world. Kissing butt is probably the fastest and easiest way to do it. David grinned and we kept walking for a bit. "Mike, I heard you had a little conversation this morning with some of our consultants over from HCP." Yeah, I just did." "Well?" Well, what?" I replied back to him a little confused. I mean, the conversation really didn't have much teeth to it. I was more confused how he heard about a conversation that happened no more than 5 minutes ago in the lobby. "Well, what did you think of them?" "What do you mean?" David Berrigan stopped dead in his tracks, looked at me and asked, "I imagine you sized them up. I know they sized you up. What did you think of them?" Before I could answer the question, we started walking again. "Everyone was cordial. They all seemed like nice people." "Nice. They're a bunch of trained killers wearing $1,000 suits. They'd steal money from a church collection jar if they knew they could get away with it." "Ah." "Here's the thing, Mike. We value transparency at this company. In fact, we value it so much that it is one of our key value principles. It doesn't pay to be sheepish. It doesn't pay to guard your language. If something is on your mind, say it." "I see." "The thing about being transparent is that there is a price to transparency. There is a cost to transparency." "A price? How so?" We started walking around the koi pond, and David Berrigan took a second to admire the many colorful fish swimming around in the pond. "We have tens of thousands of employees here at Flushy, and thanks to your recent efforts, that number has increased substantially." David Berrigan crouched down to feed the fish. Someone walked from out of the corner of my eye and handed me an NDA to sign. Without thinking, I signed it. "And just like these koi fish, Mike, sometimes our employees get too fat and happy. He looked away for a second, and the security guard ran over with some food to feed the fish. He was holding a moderately sized burlap bag, presumably food for the fish. See, the thing is, Mike, no matter how much you try to help some people, there is always that one guy who wants to try and rollerblade uphill. Do you get what I'm saying? I think so. Like I was saying, there is a cost to being transparent. Koi fish don't have a great mystery behind them. When they're hungry, they show up to feast. When they're tired, they find a place to sleep. They are very transparent about what they want in life. Ah, I see. I mean, I don't really get what we're talking about here. Am I fired, or... David Berrigan laughed and said, "No, of course not. Who said anything about firing anybody? We're just talking." David began to sprinkle fish food across the pond. The irony of a billionaire taking pleasure in tossing scraps to mindless dependent fish was not lost on me. The koi fish live in a delicately balanced ecosystem, one that I have to maintain. When one fish gets too big, we must lighten the load. When one fish takes too much out of the system, we must make adjustments. We have to bring balance. Adjustments to the koi fish. Exactly, to the koi fish. It works the same way with any other ecosystem. You follow? Sure, yeah. David Berrigan got up from feeding the fish and wiped his hands together. He started walking again, to where I had no idea. You've done a really great job convincing these brokers to get on board with Flushy. I know it wasn't easy to do what you did, especially within such a truncated time frame. Thanks, David. I appreciate that. What in the world is he getting at? I mean, where was this conversation going? We walked for a few more minutes without either one of us saying a word. This kind of felt like one of those conversations that wasn't going to be documented or written down anywhere for posterity. I hated those kinds of conversations because they never ended well. Do you know how we maintain such competitive pricing? Do you know what the secret sauce is? I thought it was the tech and the data. Well, yes, to a point it's the tech. To a point it's the data. Aside from that, do you know how we do it all? No, not really. To be honest, I have no clue. We maintain the ecosystem, Mike. It's by keeping our operating expense ratio at the lowest cost in the industry. We are a bottom-line company. So basically you're saying we do the same thing other people do, but for much less. Precisely. And what do you imagine the biggest part of our operating expense ratio is? I don't know. The building? Our people, Mike. Our people make up about 70% of our operating expense ratio. Wow, 70%. Wow is right, Mike. Wow is right. Managing an expense ratio is a lot like flying an airplane. Sometimes you have to make course corrections in order to get to your destination. This is one of those course corrections. What I need from you is a favor. It's no small feat. All I could do was clear my throat with a loud, uncomfortable cough. What I need from you and what I'm tasking all departments with is a simple mandate. That each department head reduces operating costs by 50% and head count by at least 22% across all areas of operation. We stopped for a minute. I figured he was trying to gauge my reaction. Internally, I was livid, but on the outside, the only thing I could do was to shake my head in agreement while trying to mask my disgust. Contempt aside, this just felt so capricious and arbitrary. Let me get this straight, so there is no confusion here. Please, go right ahead. You want me to reduce my operating costs by 50%. My costs are made up 100% of people under my span of control. I realize that. I just convinced these brokers to sell their businesses to us and come join Flushy at a substantial short-term pay decrease. I sold them on the vision, the long-term growth opportunity working for Flushy. They are taking variable long-term payouts with no or minimal guarantees. I realize that. I know it's a lot of ask of you. David, these aren't head count. These are people we're talking about. Real people with families, pets, mortgages. Yes, I understand that, Mike. I realize this is putting you out a bit. It's not an easy position. It's a necessary position if we want to stay competitive in the marketplace. Uh-huh. That is why, for every 1 percentage point decrease in your division's expense ratio, it will result in a one-time cash bonus of $10,000. You do for me, I do for you. I spontaneously let out this uncomfortable little laugh. So, you're going to pay me up to $5 million to fire half of my brand new sales force? Don't look at it so transactionally, Mike. These are people, remember, not just names on a spreadsheet. There is a stipulation to that offer. There are strict conditions. What kind of stipulation? David smirked. The old me would have slapped that smirk right off his face. The old me would have done a lot of things differently. This all has to be wrapped up before the end of the fiscal year. Policyholder retention needs to be maintained at 95% for 6 months following the headcount reduction. Oh, why didn't you say so? Not a problem at all, I said sarcastically. And I'll need an increase in revenue out of your business unit by at least $200,000 per month. 95%. 95% with half the sales force in play? How do you think that is achievable? How motivated do you think my sales team is going to be once we announce massive layoffs? Mike, I said it once and I'll say it 1,000 times. People don't care about their insurance policy. People don't care about their agent. People care about the price, plain and simple. To sell a Flushy policy is to sell a price. Yeah, but... Mike, I entrust that you will find a way to make this happen. What happens if I don't hit the 50% goal? David Berrigan said, Let's just hope it doesn't have to come to that, Mike. I hadn't realized it, but the 2 security guards had approached us both from behind and were hovering during the entire course of our conversation. We stood there in this awkward crescent moon half-circle formation for a few minutes. Can I count on you to get the job done? Can I count on you to balance the ecosystem? I plunged my hands into my pockets as a pathetic act of defiance. I stood there wafting in the ambiance of incredulity. What else could I say? What else could I do? I had one clear choice in front of me. You can count on me. I won't let you down, David. I knew you wouldn't let me down, Mike. David Berrigan did an about-face and started walking away. Well, I did have just one question, David. What's that, Mike? He said without turning around. He did do me the courtesy of stopping in his tracks, though. What am I supposed to tell them? You're a salesman, right? Yeah. Sell them. Figure it out. Mike, just chalk it all up to being transparent about the process and that we have to do this in order to stay competitive, but spice it up a bit. The consulting team from Hubris Consulting Partners will be around later to talk you through the process. David Berrigan walked away, and I was escorted back to the elevator by the 2 security guards. This might have been the longest elevator ride of my life. Time just slowed on down for a while. Somehow I managed to get back to my desk without having an anxiety attack. Before I had a chance to think, my phone started lighting up. I tossed it in one of my desk drawers and decided to ignore everything for a while. Gilroy knocked on my door and popped her head in. Knock, knock, knock. Boss? I looked up so she could acknowledge I was at least trying to listen. Given my recent assignment, it was hard not to ignore her. It was hard to not block out the whole world around me. "You have some people here from Hubris Consulting Partners." "See them in." One by one, the consultants came marching in. Everyone promptly sat down and had eager stamped across their foreheads. They were chomping at the bit to start. "Did David Berrigan brief you on my situation?" Henry said, "He did. He also mentioned that you were a right-to-the-point kind of guy. You don't mince words and you don't care for fluff. Given the task at hand, let's subdue the chit-chat and get down to business. Did he tell you about the riff?" "Ah, yes. You really don't waste any time." "You have a headcount reduction issue. We are aware," one of the other consultants chimed in. Henry took the lead by staring down the other consultant, making them instantly aware that they just spoke out of turn. I thought all the subtle cues in body language were rather hysterical. I mean, we were talking about eliminating people's livelihoods here. Why not cut with the semantics? Henry jumped back into the conversation and said, "Mike, the first thing you need to do is remember these aren't people you're firing. These are numbers on a spreadsheet. You're decreasing liabilities and increasing positive cash flow for the org. There is some light at the end of the tunnel." "Right. It isn't personal, right? It's just business. No, I get it." The utterance of those very words nearly made me vomit in my own mouth. For a moment there, I despised my subconscious for the proclamation of such corporate dribble. The thought of falling on my sword and quitting had crossed my mind. "Exactly right," the group said in unison. The group of consultants all nodded their heads at the same time, like a synchronized swimming team. Clearly, this wasn't their first rodeo. "How do you suggest I do that exactly?" "Simple, Mike. 2 words." Henry wanted to add some weight behind his advice, so he paused. He stuck out his hands and made the peace sign. He affirmed his statement and said, 2 words. I really wasn't in the mood for theatrics. I moved my shoulders and exaggerated my eyebrows in an attempt to get him to spit out the 2 words. "Qualitative and quantitative," he said dramatically and magnanimously. "Tell me more," I said while shrugging off his comment. "We use mostly objective assessments to determine the ongoing viability of a role. We have to ensure that the role is not redundant in nature. Sometimes we can overhire and have to right size." "Mostly objective? So—" "A role-specific competency correlation assessment, to be precise." "A competency correlation assessment. How exactly is that supposed to help?" "Mike, how many salespeople did you bring on recently? How much did you staff up?" "I brought on nearly 100 insurance salespeople in the span of a few months." "Perfect. 100. A nice round number," he said as he softly clapped his hands together. I could tell he was getting just a little too much enjoyment out of this whole thing. "Here's what we can do. We can create a test for each of the 100 employees. We can set the test to have an artificial 50% failure rate. Thus, 50% pass and 50% fail. The people who fail the test will all lose their jobs. Nice and easy, nice and objective." "Uh-huh. I mean, objective enough to pass the smell test at least." The group laughed out loud, like a laugh track on those old 1950s-style sitcoms. "What do you mean objective enough?" "We just need it to pass the smell test. That way we don't get sued. We want it to at least appear fair." "Ah, you seem to have all this down to a science." That statement seemed to really resonate with the consultants because they each perked up a little bit. "Figure it this way. You're paying most of these guys a salary, but the majority of the offer you made was for a non-vested equity position based on a variable pay-per-performance bonus structure. It was a huge gamble for these guys to come aboard, with a massive upside potential." Henry started rubbing his hands together and almost began frothing at the mouth as he was laying down the groundwork for this mass layoff. The most we could calculate to pay in a wrongful termination lawsuit is 1 year of salary, assuming it goes to legal action. And that's the worst-case scenario for the average wrongful termination lawsuit. Now you have 100 salespeople, you want to reduce that number by 50, meaning you have a total salary combined base of $5 million, which would be our potential total exposure from a legal standpoint, assuming each lawsuit was average. Go on. Believe it or not, Mike, attorneys are just like people. People do things for money. Let's say you have a wrongful termination lawsuit asking for $100,000. The attorney gets like 33% of that figure. The average cost of an attorney is $300 per hour, meaning they can work on that case for $33,000 divided by $300 per hour, or 111 hours before they lose money. Each hour an attorney works on a case is a chomp into their profit margin. If we use an assessment, it will dissuade attorneys from even taking on the case in the first place. In the event they do decide to sue, which we anticipate that figure to be about 15%, then we have the assessment as an objective measure for why we fired the person. We can dangle that assessment in front of the judge or use it as a bargaining chip to negotiate down our eventual settlement offer. I take it back. You have this down to an exact science. Look, it's not personal, it's just business. Just business, the other consultants chimed in together like a church choir. We have to fire half of our recently acquired insurance agents 2 weeks before Christmas. I'd imagine it will seem rather personal to the people we fire. Mike, that is a great point. That's why we are going to offer a lucrative severance package to all employees who agree to an arbitration arrangement, which will further reduce potential losses. We're going to offer affected employees 2 weeks of severance pay. 2 weeks? 2 weeks per? 2 weeks in total. Pretty good. I know, right? These people sold their agencies, quit their jobs, and brought all of their clients over to Flushy. And for that, we are going to give them 2 weeks of pay. Pretty generous, I know. I mean, these are employees with less than a year with the org, and they get 2 weeks of severance. All jobs are temporary. Either you get fired, the company goes out of business, you get promoted, you get riffed, you die, etc. Every job comes with risk. The thing is, Mike, we need to be nimble. We need to be able to pivot. And with a bloated sales force, we are just unable to do that. We? Well, you know what I mean. Flushy. Tell me more about the assessment. I thought you would never ask. Can you give me an example of some of the questions? I'm assuming they will be sales-specific questions. I mean, these are salespeople we're talking about here. These are core competencies we are looking for in the future. What would those be? Would you like me to give you an example? I think that might help. If you're approached by a regulator and asked to provide information about Flushy, what should you do? The room became uncomfortably silent, and the consultants all stared at me. I couldn't tell if they were baiting me into answering or just marinating in the conversation. Are you asking me, or? No, nothing like that. Your options are provide the information, say nothing, refer them to management, ignore the regulator. I wanted to shake my head in disbelief, but made sure to keep my poker face on. What in the world does that have to do with selling insurance? The consultants began to stare at each other and gauge my reaction. Would you mind giving me another example? Of course, we aim to please. A customer asks you to speak to a manager about a claim not being paid. What should you do? Pick from one of the options below. Tell your manager. Don't return the call. Tell the customer the payment is on the way without confirming. Schedule a follow-up appointment with the customer for another time, hoping they will forget about it. Do you mind if I ask something, Henry? Mind? I strongly encourage it. What exactly are the competencies of the future we are looking for with those kinds of questions? Henry slapped his knee and pointed at me. Henry chuckled and looked around the room. That's classic Mike Allen right there. Classic, one of the other consultants said. Classic, the other consultant chimed in. Great question. Future state Flushy looks more different than current state Flushy. Let me put it this way. Do you like movies, Mike? Sure, who doesn't? Do you mind if I use some hyperbole? Oh, be my guest. I'm in sales, not legal. We're looking for people to ride with us until the wheels fall off. We're looking mostly for loyalty. We're looking for people who know when to keep their mouth shut, and most importantly, when to do what they are told. In other words, we are looking for team players. You weren't joking about the hyperbole. Sorry to use all these colorful analogies. I find it helpful to paint a vivid picture. That way I know we're all on the same page. It really helps hammer home your point. So, how long is this assessment? It's an 8-hour test designed to be completed in a single sitting. The test will ultimately tell the employee one of two things. If they fail, then we deem them incompetent. If they pass, then we deem them competent enough to keep their job. Ah, so when do these tests get sent out to the employees? The consultants all started rotating their heads on a swivel, looking at each other and then back at their watches. Today, Henry said as he looked down at his watch. Today? You gotta be kidding me, right? In fact, right about now, right as we speak. My immediate reaction was to scoff and murmur a sarcastic laugh. Wait, we're not giving any advance notice? Part of what we're looking for are people who can be agile, flexible, and adaptable. How can we truly assess that characteristic if we give an advanced notice? Well, when you put it so reasonably like that, that makes complete sense to me, I said sarcastically. I was being sarcastic, but I felt that was lost on the consultants. These consultants were all blunt instruments, the kind of instruments used to knock people over the head with. Mike, we weren't born yesterday. Clearly you have some reservations with this whole process. Is that fair to say? Am I that transparent? Apparently I wasn't as slick as I thought I was. It's okay. Most people grapple with the process. Really? You don't say. Look at it this way, Mike. This is simple addition through subtraction. It's really that straightforward. We're only as strong as our weakest link. It'd be a lot tougher if we had to make the decision from a position of weakness. We are making this from a position of strength. What do you mean? I mean, Flushy is about to pop an IPO and hit record profits this quarter. That means fat bonuses for everyone upstream and job security for those downstream. Imagine if we had to make these cuts if the business was struggling. The fact we are thriving now means we shouldn't rest on our laurels. Uh-huh, I answered with trepidation. I mean, imagine what that would do to our bonuses. Oh no, I couldn't even dream of that. What a shame that would be. The consultants nodded in agreement. Again, my sarcasm fell on deaf ears. Now, we've automated most of the process for you at this point. Let everyone take the test today. If they have questions, give them this email address. It read hrassessmentsolutionsquestions@flushy.com. Okay, who monitors that email box? What do you mean, Mike? I mean, who is on the other end of that email address? What do you mean, Mike? I mean, if I send an email to that email address, who responds to it? Well, that's the beauty of it, Mike. I looked at each of the consultants and waited for some kind of answer. No one. No one what? No one looks at that email address. It goes nowhere. So you're telling me that you set up an email address for people to submit questions, but no one responds to or even looks at the questions? Correct. Okay, well, let me ask you one more question. Shoot away. What if the employee refuses to or for some reason doesn't take the test? That's a great question. A person who doesn't take the test gets a score of 0. So they fail. They fail. I mean, that would be ideal, because it would sure make our job a lot easier. If they refuse, they lose. My stomach started ripping out these loud, inaudible gargling noises. For some reason, when I got super nervous, I felt the urge to eat. Grr, blarg. Well, I'm starving. How about we all head out and grab some lunch? And that's how the fate of half the employees at Flushy were decided. 3 consultants decided the fate of thousands of employees. What could I say? Sometimes in life you do the chopping, and sometimes in life you get chopped.